In the twilight of life, some battles are just beginning. This is the story of four men who thought their war was over, only to discover that sometimes the most important mission comes when you least expect it. Frank Martinez had faced down enemy fire in the jungles of Vietnam, buried his beloved wife after 43 years of marriage, and raised two children as a single father. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. Staring at the brick facade of Sunset Manor Senior Living, while his daughter Sarah waited in the passenger seat, tissues clutched in her trembling hands. At 78, Frank had survived 3 tours in Vietnam, earned 2 Purple Hearts, and spent decades fixing everything that broke in his neighborhood. He was the man people called when they needed something done right. Now, his own daughter was telling him he couldn't be trusted to live alone. "One fall, Dad. That's all it took," Sarah had said through tears. "What if next time no one finds you for hours?" The fall had been minor, a patch of spilled coffee, a moment of lost balance. But for Sarah, it represented every parent's worst nightmare. The moment when roles reverse, when the protector needs protecting. The automatic doors of Sunset Manor whooshed open with institutional efficiency. The lobby overwhelmed Frank immediately, the smell of industrial disinfectant barely masking cafeteria food, a cheerful receptionist with impossibly white teeth beaming at him. "Welcome to Sunset Manor, Mr. Martinez. We're so excited to have you join our family." Frank surveyed his new reality with tactical assessment. Residents moving in predictable patterns, rigid schedules posted like duty rosters, communal living spaces designed for maximum efficiency. The rigid daily routine felt oddly disturbingly familiar. "What is this?" Frank muttered under his breath. "Boot camp for old men. Room 127. 12 by 12 feet of government issue. Furniture and fluorescent lighting." Frank had lived in bunkers with more personality. As he unpacked his single suitcase, the institutional sounds began to register: distant conversations, medication carts rattling down hallways, the controlled chaos of communal living. The communal atmosphere, the scheduled meals, even the way residents naturally gathered in small groups, it all reminded him of something from 50 years ago, something that had shaped him into the man he became. The Barracks, where boys became brothers, where individual identity dissolved into something larger than yourself. Frank Martinez thought he was being put out to pasture. He had no idea he was about to find his unit again. The dining hall at 6 p.m. sharp buzzed with the controlled chaos of 120 residents. Navigating the evening meal, Frank stood at the entrance, plastic tray in hand, feeling like the new guy reporting to his first assignment. That's when he heard it. A gravelly voice cutting through the dinner conversation, like a drill sergeant calling cadence. "Hey, Marine. Yeah, you with the crew cut that screams government issue. That chair's been waiting for you all evening." Frank turned to see a man with twinkling eyes and a mischievous grin waving him over. Earl Thompson had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Retired Air Force, though he joked that you never really retire from service. It just follows you home and moves in permanently. Army, actually. 3 tours, 68 to 71. "How'd you know?" "Son, I've been spotting military from 3 tables away since before you learned to march in step." Earl Thompson, Air Force, retired. Flew cargo planes over the Ho Chi Minh Trail when they were still pretending it didn't exist. The introductions came with military efficiency. Tom Bradley, Navy, 76 years old, and still maintaining the posture of a man who'd once commanded respect on the deck of a destroyer. Even at dinner, his clothes were pressed to perfection, his silverware arranged with geometric precision. Proper chain of command never hurt anyone, gentlemen. Keeps the world running on schedule. And that's Hank Williams over there. Army like yourself, Frank. Doesn't talk much since he got here, but his eyes tell stories. Hank Williams sat like a man carrying invisible weight. 77 years old, 2 tours in Vietnam, and 40 years of trying to leave the war behind him. Some battles, Frank would soon learn, never really end. Earl cracked jokes about the mystery meat they were served. Tom complained about the lack of military precision in meal service. Hank listened quietly, occasionally offering a knowing nod. This meatloaf tastes like sea rations, Frank finally contributed, and that's not a compliment. The table erupted in knowing laughter, the kind shared by men who've eaten worse and lived to joke about it. Something unexpected was happening around that scarred dining hall table. These weren't just random old men, thrown together by the accidents of age and circumstance. They were recognizing something in each other, that the outside world had long forgotten the invisible bonds forged in foxholes and fire-based perimeters. As the evening wound down, Frank realized these weren't just fellow residents. They were brothers, bonded by experiences no civilian could understand. Maybe this place wouldn't be so bad after all. Chapter 3: Old Rivalries, New Games. The third Friday of every month transformed the Sunset Manor community room into something resembling a military operation. What the activities director optimistically called social bingo night had evolved into full-scale tactical warfare. B7, that's B as in battle, lucky number 7. Earl Thompson approached bingo like a strategic bombing mission, calculated, methodical, and with complete confidence in victory. His reading glasses perched precariously on his nose as he muttered calculations under his breath, treating probability like weather patterns over enemy territory. Tom Bradley had arranged his bingo markers in perfect geometric rows, checking each called number with the methodical precision of a man who'd once tracked enemy submarines across the Pacific. His cards were oriented at exact 90-degree angles, pens arranged by color and function. Even quiet Hank seemed more animated, tapping his lucky pen against the table with nervous energy. The pen was a relic from his army days, carried through 2 tours and 40 years of civilian life. N32, that's N32. Bingo, full card, regulation win. Tom shot up from his chair. The room fell silent. Frank felt the electricity in the air. That moment when friendly competition crosses the line into something deeper, more personal. Hold on there, Admiral. Let me see those cards. House rules require verification. Earl's head snapped up like a startled hawk. Are you questioning my integrity, Thompson? Earl grinned wickedly. Same guy who double-counted push-ups back in '68 when we were both stationed at Pendleton. Yeah, I remember you, Bradley. Tom by the book, Bradley. The memories came flooding back. Camp Pendleton, 1968. Earl Thompson, hotshot cargo pilot on leave, and Tom Bradley, Navy liaison officer with a reputation for rigid adherence to regulations. They'd crossed paths during a joint training exercise, and their personalities had clashed like matter and antimatter. That was over 50 years ago, Thompson, and those push-ups were counted correctly. Cheater then, cheater now. Some things never change. For a heartbeat, the tension was real. Pride, reputation, and 50 years of unfinished business hung in the air, like smoke from a firefight. Then, like a summer storm passing, both men burst into laughter. The tension shattered like glass, replaced by the warm recognition of old soldiers who'd found worthy adversaries in each other once again. You magnificent bastard, you remembered. Never forget a fellow troublemaker, even if he does iron his underwear. Frank shook his head, grinning. These weren't just residents marking time until death. They were warriors whose competitive spirits burned as bright as ever, even if their battles were now fought over bingo cards instead of foreign soil. Some things never changed. Competition, pride, the bonds forged in service, they just found new battlefields. The scream shattered the 2 a.m. silence, like artillery fire, echoing through the halls of Sunset Manor with raw terror. Incoming, get down, Charlie's in the wire. Frank bolted upright in his narrow bed, muscle memory from 50 years ago, instantly alert, heart hammering against his ribs like machine gun fire. Down the hall, Hank Williams was fighting a war that existed only in his nightmares. But the terror was real, the commands desperate, the pain as fresh as if Firebase Charlie was burning around him all over again. Frank hurried toward the commotion, his bare feet slapping against cold linoleum. Other residents peered from their doorways like civilians caught in crossfire, unsure whether to help or hide. A night nurse was trying to calm Hank, who sat on his bed's edge, trembling and disoriented. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he looked around the room, like he didn't recognize where he was. "It's okay, Mr. Williams. You're safe. You're at Sunset Manor." But Frank could see in Hank's eyes the same haunted look he'd glimpsed in his own bathroom mirror countless times. The expression of a man caught between two worlds, never fully present in either. "I've got this. Thank you." The nurse, young and well-meaning, but lacking the vocabulary of war, stepped aside gratefully. Some conversations required a translator who spoke the language of shared trauma. Frank sat beside Hank on the narrow institutional bed, close enough to offer presence without crowding, far enough to respect the invisible perimeter that trauma survivors maintain around themselves. They sat in silence as Hank's breathing slowly returned to normal. "Kaysan?" Frank asked softly. Hank nodded, unable to speak. The question carried weight beyond geography. Kaysan, 77 days of siege, rockets falling like rain, Marines dying in red mud, while politicians debated strategy from air-conditioned rooms in Washington. "Tet offensive for me. Firebase Alpha, near and lock. Different place, same ghosts." Frank's voice carried the weight of understanding that only another veteran could provide. "You're not the only one still fighting in your sleep, brother." Hank finally looked at him, tears glistening in the dim hallway light. 50 years, Frank. 50 years, and they still won't leave me alone. The faces, the sounds. Rodriguez calling for his mama before he died. The name hung in the air like smoke. Rodriguez, 20 years old, from San Antonio, died clutching a photo of a baby daughter he'd never met. Frank remembered him too. Maybe they're not supposed to leave us alone. Maybe remembering is part of honoring what we went through, what they sacrificed. They sat together as dawn crept through the windows. Two old soldiers keeping watch over memories that would never fully fade. Ghosts that demanded honor through remembrance. Some battles never truly end. They just find new battlefields in the minds of those who survived to remember. And sometimes the greatest victory was simply refusing to fight those battles alone. The weekly storytelling circle at Sunset Manor, usually buzzed with gentle tales of grandchildren, old jobs, and better days when coffee cost a nickel and neighbors knew each other's names. But today felt different. Frank noticed the signs immediately. Earl fidgeting with his coffee cup like a nervous recruit. Tom's usually perfect military posture, seeming forced and unnatural. Hank staring at the floor, with the intensity of a man studying enemy positions. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our weekly Memory Lane Circle. Who has a story to share today? The silence stretched uncomfortably, filling the room like smoke. Finally, Earl Thompson cleared his throat, with the sound of a man about to confess his sins. There was this mission, back in '69, Firebase Charlie, near the DMZ. The words hit Frank like shrapnel. Tom's carefully maintained composure cracked like ice under pressure. Hank's hands began to shake with the tremor of a man reliving his worst moment. 4 of us were sent to evacuate wounded from a downed helicopter. Routine extraction, they called it. Should have been simple. Firebase Charlie, March 15th, 1969. A routine medical evacuation had turned into a nightmare when intelligence reports proved catastrophically wrong. What should have been a simple pickup became a fight for survival in hostile territory. The intel was wrong. Charlie was crawling with NVA. We got separated in the firefight. Tom picked up the thread with military precision, even in confession. I was team leader. My responsibility. Rodriguez didn't make it out. 20 years old, from San Antonio. Had a baby girl he'd never met. Carried her picture in his helmet liner. We left him. Hank's voice was torn from somewhere deep inside. Orders came to retreat, but we left him behind. I can still hear him calling for help. The storytelling circle had gone completely quiet. Even the activity director seemed to sense this was sacred ground. She shouldn't tread. This wasn't a story. This was a confession. 50 years in the making. Frank felt the familiar weight settling on his chest. The guilt that had followed him home from Southeast Asia and never quite left. We were 19, 20 years old, boys thrown into impossible situations by men in suits, who'd never heard a shot fired in anger. Should have stayed, should have brought him home. I gave the order to retreat. Command decision based on available intelligence. If anyone carries the blame, we all carry it, Tom. That's the point. We all made it home, and Rodriguez didn't. The 4 men sat in their circle, surrounded by other residents, but utterly alone with their shared burden. 50 years of civilian life, careers, families, grandchildren. None of it had erased the weight of that single day when everything went wrong. Rodriguez saved my life that day, pulled me behind cover when the mortars started falling. Last thing he said to me was, "Tell Maria I love her." They sat in contemplative silence as other residents quietly filed out, offering respectful nods and gentle touches on shoulders, the universal language of recognition that some stories are too important to interrupt, too sacred to ignore. 50 years. We've carried this for 50 years. Maybe it's time we figured out what to do with it. There's a memorial, about an hour north of here. Rodriguez's name is on it. Then maybe it's time we paid him a visit. Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone, and sometimes the first step toward healing is admitting you need help carrying the weight. The senior center bus rumbled north through Colorado countryside, carrying its unlikely cargo of 4 old warriors on what felt like a pilgrimage. What had started as a simple suggestion by the activities director had transformed into something deeper when Frank, Earl, Tom, and Hank volunteered to go together. Driver, destination is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, Highway 287 North. Estimated travel time 47 minutes. We're not your platoon, Bradley. Could have fooled me. Frank's got that 1,000-yard stare again, and Hank's been polishing his shoes since breakfast like we're heading into inspection. The bus held 23 residents total, but somehow the presence of the 4 veterans had changed the entire dynamic. They sat together like a military unit, unconsciously forming the same protective formation they'd learned in basic training 50 years ago. Remember that cadence from basic? The one about marching through Georgia? Thompson, you can't be serious. We're not 20 anymore. Age is just a number, Admiral. Besides, I've got 47 minutes to kill and a captive audience. Before anyone could object, Earl's gravelly voice launched into the familiar rhythm that had once carried young soldiers through endless miles of training marches. Tom joined in despite his protests, his Navy training no match for muscle memory. Frank added his voice to the chorus, and finally, even quiet. Hank found himself singing along. Other passengers on the bus turned to watch, but not with annoyance, with respect and curiosity. These were their neighbors, their friends, their fellow residents, and they were witnessing something extraordinary, 4 old men becoming young soldiers again, if only for the length of a song. They sang cadences and swapped basic training stories, each tale triggering another memory, another laugh, another moment of connection that bridged 50 years of civilian life. Earl told the story of his first flight lesson, when he'd thrown up on his instructor. Tom recounted the time he'd accidentally saluted a mannequin in dress blues. Frank shared the tale of getting lost during night navigation training. Basic training, Fort Benning. Drill sergeant caught me with a candy bar from home. Made me eat the whole thing in 30 seconds, then run 5 miles. What kind of candy bar? Snickers. Couldn't eat one for 20 years after that. For 40 minutes, they weren't residents of Sunset Manor, marking time until death. They were soldiers again, bonded by shared experiences that no civilian could understand, united by invisible threads that connect those who've served together. But as the bus pulled into the memorial parking lot, the laughter gradually faded. Through the windows, they could see the black granite wall, stretching across peaceful grounds, etched with thousands of names, each one representing a life cut short, a future that never came to pass, a family forever changed. Well, gentlemen, here we are, 50 years late, but here we are. Rodriguez is waiting. They climbed off the bus in respectful silence, four old warriors about to face the names of friends who'd never had the chance to grow old, to complain about arthritis, to worry about grandchildren, to argue about bingo games in retirement homes. The memorial stood like a cathedral made of stone and memory, a place where the past lived eternal and the fallen could finally receive the honors they'd earned with their sacrifice. Some journeys take you around the world, others take you back home, and sometimes they take you to both places at once. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial stretched before them, like a black granite timeline of loss, each panel marking another year of war, another catalogue of names that would never age, never complain about their backs, never see their children graduate or their grandchildren take first steps. Frank, Earl, Tom, and Hank approached the wall, with the reverence of pilgrims reaching a sacred shrine. Each man carried 50 years of questions, guilt, and unfinished conversations with ghosts who'd never had the chance to become old men. Panel 23W. That's where Rodriguez should be. They moved along the wall with military precision. Frank's finger, tracing dates and panel numbers until he found what they'd come for. Panel 23W, line 87. There, etched in granite for eternity, PFC Miguel A. Rodriguez, San Antonio, Texas, March 15th, 1969. There he is. For a long moment, none of them could speak. The name on the wall somehow made it real, in a way that 50 years of memories hadn't. Rodriguez wasn't just a ghost in their nightmares anymore. He was here, permanent, honored, remembered. Hank Williams stepped forward first, his weathered hand trembling as he placed it flat against Miguel Rodriguez's engraved name. His shoulders began to shake with suppressed emotion. I should have stayed. God forgive me, I should have stayed. The words he'd carried for 50 years finally found voice, torn from somewhere deep inside, where guilt and memory lived together in the darkness. I heard him calling for help. I heard him calling my name, and I ran. I followed orders, and I ran, and I left him there to die alone. Earl moved beside Hank, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. We all ran, Hank. We had direct orders to retreat. Rodriguez knew the risks, same as the rest of us. Orders don't matter when your brother needs you. Orders don't matter when you can hear him dying and you do nothing. Tom stepped forward, military bearing intact despite the emotional weight. I gave those orders, Hank. I was team leader, responsible for getting everyone home alive. If anyone carries the blame for Rodriguez, it's me. Tom straightened his shoulders with the same military bearing he'd maintained for 50 years, but his voice carried the weight of command decisions that had haunted him through decades of sleepless nights. Frank placed his own weathered hand beside Hank's, feeling the cold granite that had become Rodriguez's final resting place. We were kids, Tom. 19-year-old kids thrown into hell and told to make impossible choices. Rodriguez knew the risks, same as us. He volunteered for that mission, same as us. He died trying to save wounded Marines, not because we abandoned him, but he had a daughter, Maria Elena. She grew up without her daddy because we couldn't bring him home. And she grew up knowing her father was a hero who died trying to save others. That matters, Hank. That matters more than you know. They stood together in silence, four old men, finally saying goodbye to a young comrade who'd haunted their dreams for decades. The guilt didn't disappear entirely. Some wounds never fully heal, but something shifted, like a weight shared, becoming a weight lessened. I've written his family a dozen letters over the years. Never sent any of them. What do you say to people whose son died under your command? You tell them the truth, that he mattered, that he saved lives, that we remember. Hank reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a set of tarnished dog tags, worn smooth by 50 years of being carried. Like a talisman of guilt and remembrance, I kept his dog tags. All these years, I kept them. Never knew why. You kept them because you're a good soldier, Hank. Good soldiers don't leave anyone behind, even in death. We need to get these to his family. They deserve to have them. We were boys thrown into a man's war. We did what we could with what we had. Maybe it's time we forgave ourselves for being human. The words hung in the spring air like a benediction. For 50 years, each man had carried his portion of survivor's guilt, wondering why fate had chosen him to live when Rodriguez had died. But standing here, together, facing the truth of their shared loss, they began to understand something profound. He wouldn't want us to carry this guilt forever. Rodriguez, hell no. He'd probably laugh at us for being so dramatic about it. He'd want us to live, to honor his sacrifice by making our lives count for something. Then that's what we do. We live. We remember. We make sure his story gets told. Hank knelt slowly and placed Rodriguez's dog tags at the base of the memorial wall, beside the flowers and flags left by other visitors, carrying their own burdens of memory and loss. Rest easy, brother. We're finally home. They stood together as the afternoon sun painted the memorial in golden light. Four old soldiers who'd finally learned that forgiveness sometimes begins with letting go, that healing sometimes requires the courage to stop punishing yourself for surviving when others didn't. Sometimes forgiveness begins with letting go. Sometimes healing requires the courage to stop fighting battles that ended decades ago. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply learning that survival isn't a sin, it's a responsibility. 3 months had passed since their pilgrimage to the memorial, and the common room at Sunset Manor had taken on a completely different feeling. What had once seemed like institutional furniture arranged for maximum efficiency now felt like home-worn but comfortable, functional but warm, filled with the easy camaraderie of men who'd found their unit again. Frank Martinez settled into his usual chair, a recliner that had molded itself to his frame over countless evenings of cards and conversation. He watched as Earl Thompson dealt cards for another round of poker, with the theatrical flair of a riverboat gambler, while Tom Bradley arranged his chips in perfect military formation. Gentlemen, tonight's game is 5-card stud, no wild cards, no excuses, and no crying when I take all your money. Regulation of poker requires standard rules, Thompson. No dramatic flourishes or unnecessary commentary. You take all the fun out of everything, Bradley. It's like playing cards with an accountant. Hank Williams had become more talkative than anyone could remember, sharing stories with the enthusiasm of a man who'd rediscovered the joy of having an audience that understood his references. Speaking of accountants, did I ever tell you about the time our company clerk tried to requisition a helicopter for personal use? 3 times this week, Hank, but we don't mind hearing it again. Earl mentioned that Frank's daughter had called earlier, wanting to know if he was adjusting well to facility life. What did you tell her? That her old man found his unit again. That he's got brothers watching his six, and he's watching theirs. The words hung in the air with perfect truth, carrying weight that went beyond casual conversation. These weren't just fellow residents anymore, men thrown together by the accidents of age and circumstance. They were brothers, bonded by shared service, mutual understanding, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving life's battles together. Tom raised his coffee cup in a mock toast to the best damn outfit in the retirement home. Unit cohesion remains strong after all these years. Here, though I still outrank all of you in your dreams, Flyboy. We're all the same rank now, gentlemen. Survivors. They played cards and told stories as the evening settled around them, like an old, comfortable blanket. Other residents drifted through the common room, some joining their conversations, others simply enjoying the warmth of genuine friendship that radiated from their corner table. Rodriguez would have loved this place. All the poker he could handle, decent coffee, and nobody shooting at him. He'd probably be running some kind of elaborate betting pool on the weekly activities. Remember how he used to organize those poker games behind the mess tent? Had half the base, owing him cigarettes and candy bars. He had a gift for bringing people together. Even here, he's still doing it. It was true, in a way that would have made Rodriguez smile. His memory had become the catalyst that transformed 4 lonely old men into a family that turned a sterile retirement facility into something resembling the barracks they'd once called home. You know what the difference is between this place and the barracks? Better food, cleaner bathrooms, and nobody's trying to kill us. Well, yes, but also we chose to be here. We chose each other. Families, not always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them, and who understands without you having to explain. As the evening wound down, Frank looked around the room at his newfound family. These men who understood his nightmares and shared his pride, who knew the weight of service and the cost of survival, who'd taught him that growing old didn't have to mean growing alone. Guess I found my unit again. Unit never really disbanded, Frank. We just got scattered for a while. Took us 50 years to complete the mission, but we made it to the rally point. And now we hold this position together. No one gets left behind. Roger that, brothers. Roger that. Outside, the sun set over Sunset Manor, painting the American flag in the courtyard with shades of gold and crimson. Inside, 4 old soldiers had discovered something more valuable than youth or health, or the past they couldn't change. They'd found each other. Frank Martinez had come to Sunset Manor, expecting to mark time until the final taps. Instead, he'd learned that the most important battles aren't always fought on foreign soil, that the strongest units aren't always formed in basic training, and that sometimes the greatest victory is simply finding your way home. The barracks had taught them how to be soldiers. Sunset Manor had taught them how to be brothers. And in the end, that made all the difference. Some stories end with victory. Others end with understanding. The best ones end with both.